The rain had been falling since morning, soft and steady, covering the little white house in a curtain of silver. Inside, Laura moved around the kitchen, her hands busy but her mind far away. She had once loved the sound of rain. It used to mean warmth, laughter, and coffee shared with her husband, Mark. But lately, it only reminded her of silence. Mark had been distant for months, coming home late, speaking little, his phone always buzzing with messages he didn't explain. She told herself it was just work, but her heart knew better. That afternoon, she heard footsteps behind her. Turning around, she found David, Mark's son, standing in the doorway. He had come home from college 2 weeks ago, saying he needed time to think about his future. Laura had known him since he was 16, awkward and quiet, barely talking to her when she first married Mark. Now, at 24, he looked different, taller, older, with a calmness that seemed to hide something heavier. "Hey," he said, voice soft but warm. "Hey yourself," she replied, smiling gently. "You hungry?" He shrugged, walking to the counter. "Not really. Just can't focus today." She nodded, understanding that feeling all too well. "You should eat something. You can't think straight on an empty stomach." She opened the oven and pulled out a small pie she had baked earlier, apple, his favorite. She had made it on a whim, trying to fill the house with some kind of comfort. He watched her set the plate in front of him. "You still bake like that, huh?" he said, half smiling. "Dad used to talk about your pies all the time." Laura's hand paused for a second as she placed the fork beside his plate. "Used to?" The words echoed in her chest. She forced a soft laugh. "Well, I'm glad someone remembers." David frowned slightly, catching the sadness in her voice. "You two okay?" It was an innocent question, but it landed like a stone. She looked away, pretending to wipe her hands on a towel. "We're fine," she said, her voice too light to sound real. "He's just busy with work." David nodded, though he didn't seem convinced. He picked up the fork and took a bite of the pie. A quiet surprise flickered across his face. "This is amazing," he said, swallowing another bite. "I forgot how good your cooking was." Laura smiled faintly, but something inside her trembled. It wasn't just the compliment, it was the way he said it, with warmth and sincerity she hadn't heard from Mark in months. She sat across from him, watching as he ate slowly, and for the first time in a long while, the house felt alive again. Outside, the rain grew heavier, tapping against the windows. David leaned back in his chair, his eyes thoughtful. "I didn't expect to feel this weird after graduating," he admitted. "Everyone acts like life's supposed to make sense now. It doesn't." Laura looked at him kindly. "It never really does. We just learn to pretend we've got it figured out." He smiled a little, eyes lifting to meet hers. "Do you still pretend?" Her chest tightened. "Every day," she said softly. There was a moment of silence. Not uncomfortable, just full. The air between them carried a weight neither of them could name. It wasn't attraction, not yet. It was recognition. Two lonely hearts, sitting across from each other in a kitchen filled with unspoken truths. David's gaze drifted toward the window. "You know," he said slowly, "I used to think you and Dad were perfect. You always looked so happy together." Laura let out a small breath. "We were once. Life changes people, David. Sometimes love fades without meaning to." He nodded, taking another small bite of pie, though his expression had softened into something almost protective. "You don't deserve that," he said quietly. Laura blinked, not expecting his words. "Deserve what?" "To be treated like you don't matter," he said simply. "You've always been kind to me. You listen. You care. Not everyone does that." Her throat felt tight. She looked down at her hands, not knowing how to respond. "Thank you," she whispered after a moment. He gave a small smile, then stood up, rinsed his plate, and placed it in the sink. "You should bake more often," he said lightly, trying to lift the mood. "It makes the house feel warmer." She laughed softly. "Maybe I will." As he walked away toward his room, she watched his back disappear down the hallway. When the sound of his footsteps faded, Laura stood in the kitchen alone, her heart beating strangely fast. She looked around the quiet room, the fading daylight through the window, the smell of cinnamon and apples in the air, the empty plate on the counter. Nothing seemed different. And yet, something had shifted. That small exchange, that brief warmth she hadn't felt in so long, lingered like the taste of something sweet that you can't forget. When Mark came home late that night, he mumbled a quick hello and went straight upstairs, leaving his cold dinner untouched. Laura stood in the kitchen again, staring at the plate she had made for him. Untouched, just like all their recent conversations. She thought of David's words, his honest eyes, his simple kindness. Then she thought of her husband's tired, distracted face. It wasn't love she felt, it was the reminder of what love was supposed to feel like. The rain outside slowed to a drizzle. The clock ticked softly on the wall. And somewhere deep in her chest, something fragile began to stir. Something she hadn't felt in years. The quiet ache of being noticed. Laura turned off the kitchen light and stood there in the dark, her hand resting on the table where David had eaten. The air still held the faint scent of baked apples and cinnamon. She told herself it was nothing, just a nice conversation on a rainy day. But as she climbed the stairs and passed by the closed door of her husband's empty side of the bed, the lie didn't feel convincing anymore. In the stillness of that house, Laura realized that sometimes life doesn't shatter with noise. It cracks slowly, softly, in moments that feel too small to matter. And sometimes all it takes is one simple gesture, a slice of pie, a kind word, a shared glance to begin a change you never expected. That night, as she lay awake listening to the distant thunder, she couldn't stop thinking about the look in David's eyes when he said her name. It wasn't wrong. It wasn't right. It just wasn't. It made her heart beat in a way she thought it had forgotten how to. The rain fell again before dawn, washing over the roof in quiet waves. And somewhere in that storm, a story had begun, one that neither Laura nor David fully understood yet. But both of them could feel it deep down, in the silence that followed. The days after that quiet evening passed quickly. Yet something in the house felt changed. It wasn't something that could be seen in words, okay? No gestures, but the air between Laura and David had taken on a quiet warmth. Mark, her husband, seemed even more distant now. He left early for work, came home late, and barely looked at either of them. He was always on his phone, always tired, always elsewhere. Laura tried not to notice, but the loneliness pressed harder each day. One morning, the sun broke through the Oregon fog for the first time in weeks. Laura was watering the small flowers by the porch when David walked outside, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "You shouldn't be doing that alone," he said with a gentle smile, handing her one. She smiled back, surprised by the gesture. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep," he said. "Thought I'd join you for a walk." They walked down the narrow dirt path behind the house, through tall pine trees that smelled like rain. The air was crisp, and for the first time in months, Laura felt she could breathe. They talked about small things, his old college friends, her garden, the weather butt, as the walk went on. Their words grew deeper. "I feel lost," David admitted, staring at the ground. "I finished school, but I don't know what I'm supposed to do next. Everyone around me seems sure of their future, and I'm just standing still." Laura listened quietly. "Standing still isn't always bad," she said softly. "Sometimes it's the only way to notice where you really are." He looked at her, thoughtful. "Did you ever feel that way?" "All the time," she admitted. "Especially lately." When they returned home, the smell of Mark's cologne still hung in the hallway, even though he wasn't there. He had left a note on the counter, late again. "Don't wait up." That one line said everything Laura had been trying not to feel. Over the next few days, David began spending more time in the kitchen with her. He helped chop vegetables, clean the dishes, or just kept her company while she cooked. The quiet companionship filled the empty space that Mark had left behind. One evening, as the sky turned pink and gold, Laura was making dinner pasta with a sauce she'd made from scratch. David walked in, sleeves rolled up, holding a glass of water. "Need help?" he asked. She smiled. "You can stir the sauce if you want." "Ah." He moved beside her, the smell of garlic and herbs rising from the pan. She tasted it, frowned slightly, and handed him a spoon. "Tell me what you think." "Needs more salt." David dipped the spoon and tasted it carefully. His eyebrows lifted. "No, it's perfect. Honestly, it's amazing." She laughed lightly. "You're just being kind." He shook his head. "No, really. It's the kind of thing that makes you feel at home." For a moment, their eyes met. It was such a small thing, shared laughter, shared warmth, but it carried an emotion that neither wanted to name. Then a car's headlights flashed through the window. "Dad's home," David said quickly, stepping back. Laura's heart jumped for reasons she didn't fully understand. Mark entered the kitchen, talking on his phone. He gave them a distracted nod before heading upstairs. No kiss, no question about dinner, not even a smile. When he was gone, the silence that followed was louder than words. Later that night, Laura stood by the kitchen sink washing dishes. David leaned against the counter beside her, drying them. They didn't talk much, but the quiet felt easy between them. Then he said softly, "He doesn't even see you anymore, does he?" Laura froze, the plate still in her hands. "It's not that simple." "I think it is," David replied. "You do everything for him. You care. You try. But he's not here, Laura. Not really." His honesty hit her harder than she expected. She set the plate down and sighed. "I made vows. I meant them. I still do." He nodded, looking down. "I know. But you can't love someone alone." The words lingered in the air like smoke. Laura didn't answer. She didn't need to, because deep down, she knew he was right. That night, she couldn't sleep. The house was quiet except for the sound of rain starting again. She turned and looked at the empty space beside her in bed. Mark had texted earlier saying he was staying overnight for work. She read the message twice, then set the phone aside. In the guest room down the hall, David sat awake too, staring at the ceiling. He thought of her tired smile, the way her eyes softened when she laughed, the strength in her voice even when she was hurting. He respected her, cared for her, but the feelings growing inside him frightened him. The next morning, Laura made pancakes and left a plate for Mark, though she knew he wouldn't be home. David walked into the kitchen, sleepy-eyed but smiling. "You're up early again? Old habits," she said. He sat down and took a bite of the pancakes. "You're spoiling me. Just like cooking for someone who appreciates it," she said, half joking. He looked at her, then said quietly, "You deserve someone who appreciates you." Laura looked up, startled, but before she could respond, the phone rang. It was Mark. She picked it up quickly. "Hey," she said, trying to sound cheerful. "Can't talk long." His voice came through, flat and distracted. "I'll be home late again. Don't wait for me." "Mark," she began, but the line had already gone dead. She set the phone down slowly. David didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The silence told both of them what they already knew. The distance in her marriage had turned into a wall. That evening, she went out to the porch, the same place they had walked days before. The sun was setting, coloring the sky in shades of red and gold. David came out after her, quietly sitting beside her. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, though her eyes were wet. "I'm just tired, David. Tired of being the only one who's trying." He reached over, hesitated, then gently placed his hand over hers. "You don't have to try alone anymore." She looked at him, her heart aching at the kindness in his face. For a second, she wanted to believe him, to believe that she could lean on someone again, that maybe the loneliness didn't have to stay forever. But she pulled her hand back softly, shaking her head. "You're kind, but this isn't your burden." David's expression didn't change, but his voice was steady. "Maybe it's not a burden. Maybe it's just caring." Laura looked away, her heart pounding. The sunset reflected in her eyes, and for a moment she forgot about everything, the lies, the distance, the years of silence. She only felt the warmth of someone who saw her, really saw her. Inside, the clock ticked quietly. Another night without Mark. Another moment that blurred the line between right and wrong. But as the last light faded behind the trees, Laura realized something she hadn't wanted to admit. Her heart was waking up again. Not in the way it used to, not in a way she understood, but in a way that reminded her she was still alive. And sometimes being alive hurts, but it also means there's still hope. The following weeks slipped by like pages of a book. Laura wasn't sure she wanted to keep reading. The once happy home now felt colder, quieter. Mark had stopped pretending to care. He barely spoke to her, barely looked at her. When she asked about his late nights, he always said, "Work's been tough," but the perfume scent on his shirts, the half-smudged lipstick marks on his collar, and the phone he guarded like a secret told her everything she didn't want to believe. David noticed the change too. He didn't ask questions at first, but he saw the sadness in her eyes and the way she tried to smile through it. One evening, Laura sat on the front porch, the air cool and sharp. Her hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had gone cold. The sunset spread across the sky, soft and tired like her heart. David joined her, sitting down silently. For a long time, neither spoke. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he asked, "He's seeing someone else, isn't he?" Laura didn't look at him. She stared at the fading light, her throat tight. "I don't know," she said, though she did. David's jaw tensed. "You don't deserve this." She let out a shaky sigh. You can't control how people fall out of love. Sometimes they just do. Sometimes they stop trying, and you're left wondering if you did something wrong. He turned toward her. "You didn't do anything wrong, Laura." Hearing her name in his calm voice made her heart ache in a way she couldn't explain. It had been months since anyone had spoken to her like she mattered. "I used to think love could fix anything," she said. "I was wrong." David looked at her carefully. "Love isn't supposed to fix things. It's supposed to make life worth fixing." For a moment, her eyes met his, and something unspoken passed between the men, understanding, a shared pain. Laura quickly looked away, afraid of the warmth she felt. She didn't want to feel anything. Not now, not toward him. But her heart didn't listen. That night, when Mark finally came home, Laura asked quietly, "Can we talk?" He didn't even put down his bag. "Not now, Laura. I'm exhausted." "When then?" She pressed, her voice trembling. "You're never here. You don't talk to me. I want to know what's happening to us." Mark sighed heavily. "There's nothing to talk about." "You're overthinking again." She stared at him, feeling invisible. He brushed past her and disappeared into the bedroom. She stood there for a long moment, her hands shaking, her heart heavy. When she finally went to bed, he was already asleep, turned away. As always, the next morning David found her in the kitchen, her eyes red from crying. "He didn't even listen, did he?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "I think I've been talking to a wall for a year." He hesitated, then said, "You don't have to pretend it's okay anymore. You've been holding everything inside." She managed a weak smile. "If I don't hold it in, I'll fall apart." "Maybe falling apart is the first step to healing," he said softly. She looked at him, eyes glistening. "You sound wiser than your age." He smiled faintly. "You're the one teaching me." Later that day, while she was doing laundry, Laura found a woman's earring in one of Mark's jacket pockets. Her hands froze. The truth she had been running from was now staring her in the face. She sat down on the edge of the bed, the small golden earring shining cruelly in her palm. When Mark came home that evening, she asked him straight out, "Who is she?" He blinked, pretending not to understand. "What are you talking about?" She held out the earring. "I found this." His face hardened. "You're snooping through my things now." "That's low, Laura." "You're lying to me," she whispered, voice breaking. "All I ever did was love you." Mark's voice turned cold. "Maybe that's the problem. You love too much." She stared at him in disbelief as he grabbed his keys and left without another word. The door slammed behind him. And the silence that followed felt heavier than anything she had ever known. David found her sitting on the stairs, her head in her hands. "Laura." She looked up, tears streaming down her cheeks. "He didn't even deny it, David. He just walked away." He knelt beside her. "You don't deserve this kind of pain." She shook her head. I thought love meant fighting for someone, but maybe love means knowing when to stop. He reached out, hesitated, then gently took her hand. You don't have to face this alone anymore. For a long moment, she didn't pull away. The warmth of his hand felt safe, grounding. Then, realizing what she was doing, she quickly stood up, wiping her tears. I need some air, she said, her voice shaking. She stepped outside, the night sky wide and cold. The wind brushed her face as she looked up at the stars, whispering to herself, what happened to us, Mark? What happened to me? Behind her, David watched from the doorway, worry written all over his face. He wanted to comfort her, but he knew she needed space. Over the next few days, Mark didn't come home at all. Laura stopped calling him. Something inside her had gone quiet. She wasn't angry anymore, just empty. But in that emptiness, a strange kind of clarity began to form. One evening, she sat by the fireplace, lost in thought, when David joined her. You should eat something, he said, handing her a plate. She smiled faintly. You're turning into the caretaker now. Someone has to, he said, sitting beside her. For a while, they ate in silence. Then Laura said softly, do you ever wonder if love is supposed to hurt this much? David shook his head. Real love shouldn't make you feel small. She looked at him, her heart tightening. You talk like someone who's been through it. Hay met her gaze. Maybe I'm just learning from watching you. There was a quiet pause. The fire crackled softly. Then Laura said, almost to herself, sometimes I think I forgot what it feels like to be seen. You're seen, David said, firmly. By me. She froze. The words hung in the air, gentle but heavy. Their eyes met and something shifted, something tender and dangerous. Laura's heart raced. She stood quickly, pretending to fix the fire. I think I'll go to bed, she said quietly. David nodded, his face unreadable. Good night, Laura. She walked up the stairs slowly, every step echoing louder than it should. Inside her, a storm was building, a mix of guilt, confusion, something that felt painfully like longing. When she reached her room, she looked at the empty side of the bed again. She touched the pillow where her husband used to sleep, then turned toward the window. Down below, through the glass, she saw David sitting by the fire, head bowed, lost in thought. For the first time in months, she didn't feel entirely alone. That frightened her more than the silence ever had. Outside, the wind howled softly against the house. Inside, two hearts sat awake in different rooms. Both asking the same silent question, neither dared to speak. When love breaks, where does it go? Morning came quietly, the world outside still gray from the mist. Laura stood by the window, watching the street fade into the fog. Her husband Mark had left before dawn without a word. She had heard his car start, the sound fading away like a final goodbye. For the first time in a long while, she didn't cry. She just stood there, calm, tired, and strangely free. When she turned around, David was in the kitchen, already brewing coffee. He looked up and gave her a soft smile. You're up early, he said. She nodded. Couldn't sleep. He poured her a cup and handed it to her. You look different today, he said, studying her face. Laura gave a small smile. Maybe I'm just done pretending everything's fine. For a moment, they stood in silence. The smell of coffee filled the air. Then David said quietly, You've been strong for too long. It's okay to stop holding it all in. She sat down, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. I don't know what happens next, she admitted. I spent years building a life that doesn't exist anymore. Then maybe it's time to build a new one, he said simply. His words were kind, but they hit deep. Laura looked up, her eyes tired yet filled with something new. Peace. You sound so sure, she said softly. I'm not, he replied. But I know you deserve better than pain. For the rest of the morning, they cleaned the kitchen together, quiet but comfortable. It was a simple thing, yet it felt like a fresh start. When she dropped a plate and laughed, David laughed too. It was the first time she'd heard herself laugh in months. Later that day, she received a message from Mark. We need space. I'm staying away for a while. No apology, No explanations, just distance written in a few cold words. Laura read it once, then deleted it. There was nothing left to say. That evening, the sky turned gold and purple as the sun dipped behind the trees. She sat on the porch with a cup of tea, the cool breeze brushing her face. David joined her quietly. They watched the light fade without speaking for a while. Finally, she said, when I first met Mark, I thought he was my forever. But forever can end quietly, can't it? David nodded. Sometimes forever just means for a while. She smiled sadly. I guess you're right. He looked at her, his expression gentle. I know it hurts now, but one day this will just be a story you tell. You'll remember that you made it through. Laura turned toward him. You've been my strength through all of this, David. You listened when no one else did. Thank you. He hesitated, then said softly, you offered me something to taste, and it wasn't just your cooking. It was hope. Laura blinked, her heart tightening. Hope? He smiled faintly. Yeah, when I came back here, I felt lost. But watching you, even through all your pain, reminded me that people can start over. That love can still exist, even if it changes shape. Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they weren't from sorrow. You're a good man, David, she said, her voice trembling slightly. You have no idea how much those words mean to me. The moment was soft, filled with quiet emotion. There was no need for more words. The connection between them wasn't about romance, it was about healing. Two souls, bruised but not broken, finding light again in each other's presence. The following week, Laura packed a small suitcase. She told Mark she needed time to think and went to stay at her sister's cabin by the lake. The house by the pines felt too heavy with memories. David helped her load the car. When she closed the trunk, she turned to him, unsure what to say. Will you be okay here? She asked. He nodded. Yeah, but it won't feel the same without you. She smiled softly. Take care of the house. And yourself. He looked at her, eyes full of unspoken things. I'll miss our talks. Me too, she admitted. But this is something I need to do alone. David didn't argue. He just nodded, understanding. Before she got into the car, he said, You taught me what strength looks like, Laura. Don't forget that. She smiled one last time. Goodbye, David. The drive to the lake was long and quiet. The road wound through endless trees, sunlight flickering through the leaves. When she reached the cabin, she sat by the water, watching the reflection of the sky ripple across the surface. For the first time in years, she let herself breathe without guilt. The first night there, she wrote in her journal for hours. She didn't write about Mark or what he did. She wrote about herself, what she loved, what she missed, what she wanted to become. It felt like meeting an old friend she'd forgotten. Days turned into weeks. Laura walked by the lake every morning, watched the stars at night, cooked simple meals, and learned to enjoy her own company again. The ache was still there, but it was softer now, a scar instead of a wound. One afternoon, she received a letter in the mail. It was from David. His handwriting was neat but hesitant, as if he wasn't sure what to say. I hope you're finding peace, Laura. The house feels empty without your laughter. I got a new job offer out of state, something I've been waiting for. I'm leaving soon. But before I go, I want you to know that meeting you changed me. You reminded me that kindness still matters. Thank you for that. Laura smiled as she read it. She folded the letter carefully and placed it inside her journal. That evening, she walked to the water again, the sunset painting the lake in gold. The wind brushed against her hair as she whispered, Thank you, David, for everything. Months later, when autumn arrived, Laura returned home. The house felt different, quiet, but peaceful. Mark was gone for good. He had left her a brief message about moving on. She wasn't surprised, and she didn't feel broken. She simply closed that chapter. David had already left for his new job. He had left a note on the kitchen counter. Wherever life takes us, I hope you keep smiling. You deserve it. Laura stood there for a long time, holding the note, tears glistening in her eyes, but her lips curved into a soft smile. She walked to the porch, the same place where so many memories began, and watched the sky turn to twilight. She thought of everything she had lost and everything she had gained. She thought of love, of betrayal, of healing. Then she whispered to herself, maybe healing is just another kind of love. The wind moved gently through the trees, carrying away the last of her pain. She closed her eyes, breathed deeply, and smiled at the sound of her own heart steady, strong, and alive. Because sometimes life doesn't end with heartbreak. It begins there. And in that quiet beginning, Laura found what she had been missing all along herself.